black belt laughed as he pointed at the quiet grandmother standing by the edge of the gym. "Hey, Grandma, want to spar?" "Just for fun," he sneered, drawing smirks from the crowd. Maggie Calloway barely flinched. At 68, she was known to most here as just a soft-spoken regular, kind, reserved, almost invisible. But something in her eyes made a few people pause. The gym had never seen anything like this before. "Come on, just a quick demonstration," the black belt taunted, stepping onto the mat with confidence. What happened next silenced everyone, students, parents, even the instructors. Because beneath Maggie's calm exterior lay decades of untold strength, a secret life of sacrifice and skill, waiting to reclaim respect in the most unexpected way. Just a quick little pause before I forget. If you like this kind of stories of overcoming adversity and justice, please leave a like and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to our channel so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. I guarantee you won't want to miss it. Now let's jump back in. The smell of floor polish and faint sweat hung in the air, a scent unique to martial arts academies, where effort and discipline seep into the very walls. It was a Saturday morning at Silverstone Martial Arts Academy, the weekly open mat session. Sunlight spilled through the tall front windows, streaking across the polished wooden floors. The space was alive with the sound of sneakers squeaking, the thud of padded bags being struck, and the low murmur of parents chatting in the viewing area. At the center of it all stood Ethan Cole, 32 years old, the Academy's most celebrated black belt instructor. He wore a crisp white GI, sleeves rolled high enough to show forearms crisscrossed with the faint marks of past competitions. His black belt, edges fraying from years of wear, was tied with the neatness of habit. He had an easy smile that could be charming, but often carried a faint, razor-thin edge that let people know exactly where they stood. Near the entrance, the glass door swung open quietly. Margaret Maggie Calloway, 68, stepped inside. She moved without hurry, one hand holding a light gray cardigan closed at the front. Beneath it, a faded navy t-shirt bore the logo of a long-closed diner. She wore plain black track pants and spotless white sneakers, her short silver hair neatly brushed. Her movements had a measured quality, not stiff, but deliberate, like someone who had learned to pace herself. A few heads turned. It wasn't common to see someone her age at the open mat, especially alone. Ethan noticed. He stepped forward with the confidence of someone used to commanding a room. "Well, this is new," he called out, his voice carrying over the chatter. "We've got Grandma joining us today." The comment drew chuckles from a knot of younger students near the wall. Maggie's expression didn't change. She slipped off her cardigan, folded it with care, and placed it over the back of a chair. Ethan's grin widened. "Here to watch? Or maybe you want to spar?" The way he said it, light, almost playful, carried the unmistakable undertone of a joke at her expense. The crowd laughed more openly this time. Maggie paused, her eyes meeting his. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply looked at him, a still, unblinking moment that seemed to slow the air. It was nothing obvious, but for anyone paying attention, it was the first hairline crack in the easy mood of the room. Ethan held her gaze for a moment longer, as though expecting her to laugh it off and take a seat with the other spectators. When she didn't, he shifted his weight and tilted his head. "Well, what do you say? You and me a light round. I'll go easy." A ripple of laughter passed through the students, the kind of collective reaction that feeds on itself. One young man, barely in his 20s, leaned toward his friend and whispered just loud enough for others to hear. "She's going to break a hip before she even gets to the mat." The friend stifled a laugh. Maggie turned her head slightly in their direction, but again, no reaction. She picked up a pair of spare training gloves from the shelf by the wall. They were a little too large for her hands, the Velcro straps hanging loose until she began tightening them with slow precision. That simple act quieted one or two chuckles. There was something in the way she moved, not hurried, not fumbling, deliberate. Ethan chuckled as though the entire thing was still a joke he was in control of. "All right then, Grandma's got spirit. Tell you what." He gestured toward the open mat, still glistening from the last round of drills. "We'll keep it friendly. First tap, match ends. Sound fair?" She looked at him, a brief, steady glance, and then nodded once. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet but clear. "Fair." The word landed heavier than expected. Maybe it was the lack of hesitation. Maybe it was the way she said it, without trying to match his humor or energy. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't compliance. It was agreement, plain and simple, with no hint that she thought she needed mercy. The crowd shifted, some people edging closer to the mat, others pulling out their phones. This was turning into more entertainment than they'd expected. As Maggie stepped toward the center, she placed her folded cardigan on the chair beside the wall. A thin leather strap slid from the pocket, attached to a set of worn, military-style dog tags. They clinked softly against the metal chair leg before disappearing from view. Nobody commented on it. Not yet, but the first seed of curiosity was planted. Maggie stepped onto the mat without hurry, the soft rubber giving slightly under her sneakers. She didn't fidget, didn't glance around to gauge reactions. Her focus was inward, and it showed. Ethan rolled his shoulders, loosening up as if preparing for a playful exhibition match. "You ever done this before?" he asked, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she tightened the last strap on her gloves, tugged it twice to be sure, then raised her head. "A while back," she said. Her voice was low, but the words carried. The tone wasn't coy. It wasn't evasive. It was honest, but without giving away anything. A while back. It could mean a year ago or 40 years ago. One of the students on the sideline, Jamie, 19, wearing a blue belt and a sleeveless academy shirt, smirked. "Bet that means aerobics class in the 90s. His friend chuckled. If Maggie heard them, she didn't let on. Her posture was upright, but not rigid. Hands loosely at her sides. Weight evenly distributed. No wasted movement. From the viewing bench, Clara, a woman in her mid-40s and mother to one of the students, leaned forward slightly. She wasn't smiling. There was something in the way Maggie's stance reminded her of someone she used to know, someone who had been dangerous without looking it. The room settled a little as Ethan bowed lightly, a show of respect before the spar. Maggie returned the gesture without flourish, her eyes lowering briefly, then returning to his. A faint scar ran across the knuckle of her right hand, thin but deep, the kind that only comes from repeated impact over many years. The overhead lights caught it for just a second before she shifted. "All right, folks," Ethan called out. "Let's make this quick. Don't blink or you'll miss it." Laughter bubbled again from the younger crowd. Maggie inhaled slowly, exhaled even slower. Her mind was elsewhere now, not in this room, not on this polished floor, but somewhere in the dust and heat of another life. The sound of the room faded, the laughter dimming into background noise. She had been underestimated before. She knew the weight of it, and she knew exactly how to carry it. Ethan shifted into a casual stance, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet. It was the posture of someone certain they were in control, certain they could end this match whenever they wished. Maggie mirrored none of it. She stood still, not stiff, but rooted, as though her center of balance was deep in the floor itself. One hand opened and closed slowly, feeling the give of the gloves. The faint sound of Velcro brushing against itself marked the only movement she allowed. From the far bench, Clara couldn't stop watching her. Something about the way Maggie's chin dipped ever so slightly, the way her shoulders were relaxed but aligned, spoke of long-forgotten muscle memory. Clara thought of her brother, a quiet man who had come back from deployment with the same stillness in his body, the same ability to stand like a stone in the middle of chaos. A sliver of light from the window caught the edge of Maggie's dog tags where they now rested on the chair, half hidden under the cardigan. The metal was dull, the edges worn smooth from years of being handled. And just for a second, in her mind, Maggie was not standing in a bright, polished academy. She was back in the stale heat of a makeshift tent overseas. She could smell the dust, hear the metallic snap of a rifle's bolt. The air in that memory was heavy with anticipation, the kind that settles on your chest when you're waiting for something you can't stop. She remembered the sound of boots outside, the sharp bark of an order, the weight of a promise made over the radio, one she'd kept, but at a cost the others never saw. Then, just as quickly, the sound faded and the gym returned. Ethan was still talking, half to her and half to the audience. "Don't worry, folks. I'll make sure this is safe. We'll call it the Senior Circuit Division." Laughter again, but not as loud this time. Maggie looked at him, her expression unreadable. If anyone had asked her in that moment why she didn't rise to his bait, She wouldn't have explained. She didn't need to prove herself with words. Her entire life had been proof. And the room was about to see exactly what that meant. The mat was set. Ethan bounced on his heels, still grinning, feeding off the last wave of laughter from the crowd. But something was different now. The sound didn't quite fill the room the way it had a few minutes ago. Jamie, the 19-year-old blue belt who had been the loudest about the grandma jokes earlier, suddenly found himself watching Maggie more closely. It wasn't that she looked dangerous in the obvious sense. She wasn't glaring. She wasn't flexing or moving with exaggerated speed. But her stillness had weight, the kind of weight that made you want to measure your words. Man, she's just standing there, his friend whispered. Is she even gonna? Shoo. Jamie cut in, without realizing why. From the viewing area, Clara's son, Ryan, sat forward in his chair. He was only 14, wearing his white GI for the beginners class later that morning. He'd never seen anyone stand like that before, not even the higher belts at the academy. It reminded him of a coiled spring, not tense, but ready. Ethan finally raised his hands, signaling the start. Maggie didn't mirror him right away. Instead, she took one slow step forward, heel, then toe, the way one might step onto uncertain ground. Ryan caught that tiny movement and felt a chill. Ready? Ethan asked. She nodded once. No words. The chatter in the room dipped, almost without anyone deciding it should. You could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights, the muted thump of a bag being struck in the corner by a student warming up. Even the phones people had pulled out seemed to be held more carefully now, as though the act of filming had shifted from amusement to curiosity. Maggie's eyes never left Ethan's. They didn't dart, didn't flick to the crowd. She saw him, entirely, and for the first time, he noticed it. His grin faltered for the smallest fraction of a second before returning. All right then, he said, but his tone had lost a shade of its earlier playfulness. A few people on the benches exchanged glances they couldn't quite explain. No one said it out loud, but the thought was there, unformed yet persistent. Who exactly is she? The mat felt different now. The energy had shifted, subtle, but undeniable. It was as if someone had turned down an invisible volume knob, leaving a space that made every small movement louder in the mind. Ethan still wore that confident posture, but his eyes were sharper now, scanning her stance. He'd seen hundreds of students stand across from him. Most shifted nervously. Most gave away some tell, a twitch of the hands, a bounce of the knees, a quick glance to the floor. Maggie gave him nothing. From the bench, Clara leaned slightly toward an older man she recognized as Tom Alvarez, a retired sheriff who'd brought his grandson to the class. Tom wasn't smiling either. His brow was furrowed just enough to show that he'd noticed something. You see that? Clara asked quietly. Tom didn't look away from the mat. Yeah, she's centered. Centered? Not just balanced, he murmured. She's grounded. The kind of grounded you don't pick up in a few months of training. On the far side of the room, Ryan sat with his hands gripping his knees, leaning forward so far his GI jacket slipped off one shoulder. He couldn't explain it, but he felt like something important was about to happen, something more than just a friendly spar. Ethan took a small step forward, testing distance. Maggie didn't react outwardly, but her head tilted just slightly, as if she'd already calculated the range between them. One of the younger women in the room, Leah, whispered to the friend beside her. Why is she looking at him like that? Like what? Like she already knows what he's going to do before he does it. On the bench, the dog tags caught the light again when someone brushed past the chair. This time, Tom noticed them. His eyes narrowed. The clink of metal on metal was faint, but to him, it was a sound you never forget. In the middle of the mat, Ethan tried another feint, a small drop of the shoulder to see if she'd react. She didn't. The crowd didn't know it yet, but the laughter that had come so easily before was gone now. No one had decided to stop it. It had simply drained away. Something in the room had shifted from amusement to attention. The moment stretched, each second pulling tighter. Ethan circled slowly, his bare feet gliding over the mat. Maggie didn't chase his movement. She pivoted just enough to keep him in her line of sight, her hands still resting in that loose, deceptively neutral position. From the bench, Tom Alvarez kept watching the dog tags on the chair. The light hit them again, and this time, he caught the faint engraving. He couldn't make out the full line, but the letters were blocky, military style, the kind he'd seen 100 times in his years on the force. He knew better than to jump to conclusions, but something was gnawing at the back of his mind. People didn't just wear those for fashion. Not like that. Think she's a vet, Clara murmured. Tom's jaw tightened slightly. Maybe. He didn't add the rest of his thought. Or something more. Back on the mat, Ethan spoke up, voice lighter than the set of his jaw. You know, most people your age come in here looking for cardio or Tai Chi. Maggie's reply was quiet but firm. I'm not most people. It wasn't meant as a boast, but it landed like one. For Ryan, sitting just meters away, that was the first time he'd ever heard someone sound so sure of themselves without raising their voice. It made him sit up straighter. Ethan gave a short laugh. All right then, not most people. Let's see what you've got. He stepped forward with a testing jab. Not hard, just enough to probe. Maggie's response was minimal, a half shift of her weight, her left hand angling just enough to redirect without contact. It was clean, precise. Tom's eyes narrowed again. That wasn't the clumsy instinct of someone unfamiliar with a fight. That was economy of movement. The kind drilled into you until it's not even a thought. Leah, the young woman who had been whispering earlier, noticed it too. She didn't even move her feet, she said under her breath. She just tilted her hand. Ethan reset his stance, his smile tighter now, just a little forced. In the quiet that followed, Maggie's eyes flicked, just once, toward the bench where her coat and tags lay. Not in longing, not in hesitation, almost like she was checking that they were still there. Whatever they meant, they mattered. Ethan paced in a slow arc, his eyes reading her stance. He threw another light jab, this one followed by a half step forward. Maggie shifted, not away, but at an angle that subtly closed off his line of attack. She didn't strike, didn't push, just moved with the certainty of someone who knew how to be where they needed to be and nowhere else. The room was quiet enough now that the sound of Velcro brushing against her gloves was audible. Maggie's fingers flexed once, then stilled again. And then, without warning, the hum of the gym's fluorescent lights blurred into a different sound in her mind. The high, thin buzz of a generator in a field tent. Heat pressed in, not the gentle warmth of morning sun through gym windows, but the kind that made the air taste of dust and metal. She could see her hands then, not gloved, but bare, knuckles raw and scraped, closing the zipper on a medic's kit. A voice had been speaking over a comm in that memory, clipped, urgent. You've got 5 minutes before the convoy. She nodded without looking up, even though no one could see her. Time had moved differently then, measured in heartbeats instead of seconds. The flash of movement in the gym pulled her back. Ethan had shifted his weight, testing her reflexes again. She adjusted smoothly, the memory dissolving as quickly as it had come. But Tom Alvarez, watching from the bench, caught something in her eyes. It was the way they sharpened for a moment, as though she'd just been somewhere else entirely, somewhere far from mats and mirrors. He'd seen that before, in old friends who carried parts of themselves in places most people couldn't follow. Leah whispered again to her friend, "Why do I feel like she's not even trying yet?" Her friend shrugged, but neither of them looked away. Ethan gave a short chuckle and straightened. "All right, Grandma. Let's give them a show." Maggie's answer was a single nod. She wasn't here to give them a show. She was here to make sure something important was understood. The air in the room was taut now, like a rope stretched to the edge of fray. Ethan had stopped smiling quite so easily. His movements were sharper, more intentional, but there was still that undercurrent of trying to make this look like a playful exchange. The audience wasn't laughing anymore, though. They were watching, really watching. Maggie adjusted her stance again, so subtly that only the trained eyes in the room caught it. It was the kind of shift that set a trap without showing there was one. Her knees bent just enough, shoulders lowering, chin tucked in. Tom Alvarez leaned forward on his elbows, his voice low as he spoke to Clara. "That's combat stance." Clara frowned. "Like in the military?" Tom nodded faintly, still studying her. "Yeah, not the stuff they teach for sport. This is different." Ethan moved in with a quick combination, a jab, a feint to the side, then a sweeping motion toward her lead leg. It should have at least made her flinch. But Maggie slid her foot back half an inch, weight rolling effortlessly to her rear leg, and the sweep hit nothing but air. She didn't counter. She didn't need to. The precision of that movement alone made Ethan's brow crease for the first time. Ryan, still sitting on the bench, whispered to himself. She knew exactly what he was going to do. The gym was so quiet now that the faint metallic sound of the dog tags shifting under the cardigan was almost audible. The small movement had exposed them again, and this time the light caught more of the inscription. Tom squinted, catching 3 letters clear as day. They were enough to make him straighten in his seat, his jaw tightening. He didn't speak them aloud, not yet, but recognition was there in his eyes. Leah noticed his reaction. "You know her?" she asked quietly. Tom shook his head once, but it wasn't denial. It was something closer to reverence. I know of her," Ethan Reese said, bouncing lightly, but the edge in his voice was gone now. "All right," he said, almost under his breath. "Let's see how far this goes." The crowd leaned forward as one, unknowingly on the verge of an answer that would change the room. The atmosphere in Silverstone Martial Arts Academy had shifted completely. What had started as a playful Saturday open mat had transformed into something far more serious, an unspoken tension that wrapped itself around everyone present. The laughter that had filled the room just moments ago was now a distant memory, replaced by a quiet expectance. Ethan Cole, once brimming with confidence and casual arrogance, now wore the look of a man who understood he was about to face something unexpected. His smile had faded, replaced by a measured, steady gaze. The flicker of humor in his eyes had been replaced by focus, the kind forged in years of competition and unyielding discipline. Taking a deliberate step forward, Ethan's voice dropped low, yet remained clear enough for all to hear. "All right, Maggie," he said, his tone no longer teasing but respectful. "If you want to spar, let's make it official. No holding back. First tap ends the match." His words hung heavy in the air. The crowd around the mat leaned in. Parents exchanged wary glances. Students shifted, some swallowing nervously, others stiffening in anticipation. This was no longer entertainment. It was a confrontation charged with something deeper. Ethan's eyes locked with Maggie's, searching for any sign of hesitation, uncertainty, or doubt. Instead, he found a stillness so profound it almost seemed to anchor the space around them. Maggie nodded once, a subtle but unbreakable gesture. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried the weight of certainty that silenced the room further. "When we're done," she said softly, "you'll apologize." There was no anger in her tone, no bravado or provocation, just a calm, unwavering statement of fact, the kind that speaks of experience and quiet confidence, not threats. A ripple passed through the crowd, the kind that comes from realizing this was no ordinary sparring challenge, but a reckoning waiting to unfold. Jamie, the young blue belt who had mocked her earlier, looked around uneasily. His earlier bravado was replaced by a nervous glance, as though he suddenly understood that the woman he'd laughed at might not only win, she might teach them all a lesson they'd never forget. Ethan took a moment to adjust his GI collar, tightening it as if steeling himself for a battle he hadn't anticipated. His breath was steady now, his stance more measured, less casual. "Fair enough," he said, voice firm but carrying a hint of respect. "Let's give them the match they came for." Maggie stepped fully onto the mat now, shedding the last remnants of casualness. Her presence filled the space, not loud or demanding, but undeniable. She folded her gloved hands lightly in front of her, eyes calm, unwavering, unyielding. The crowd fell completely silent, the kind of silence that presses against your skin and draws every nerve into sharp focus. Phones were raised again, but no one dared whisper or laugh. The anticipation was palpable, a collective breath held, waiting. In this charged stillness, every person there knew, even if they couldn't yet put it into words, this was no ordinary sparring match. This was a moment where respect, history, and unspoken truth would collide, and the outcome would change the way they saw Maggie Calloway forever. The room seemed to exhale as the last ripple of whispered speculation died down. The usual restless chatter that filled the Silverstone Martial Arts Academy on a busy Saturday morning had given way to something heavier, an almost reverent silence. Phones lowered slowly from faces that had moments ago been eager to capture the spectacle. Parents, students, and onlookers alike now sat or stood with eyes fixed intently on the center mat. Ethan, who moments ago had worn the confident grin of a man about to show off his skill, felt the shift in the atmosphere like a sudden chill. His eyes flicked over the crowd, noting the tightening jaws, the unblinking gazes, the subtle tightening of grips on bench edges and folded arms. Even the younger students, usually restless, eager for action, had stilled. His glance returned to Maggie. She stood quietly, poised like a rock in a storm, the faintest crease of concentration knitting her brow. There was no flourish in her movements, no attempt to impress or intimidate. Instead, she exuded a calm certainty, a dignity that seemed to radiate from some deep well of experience. Across the benches, Clara exchanged a look with Tom Alvarez. Both carried the faint lines of age and wisdom, and in their eyes was recognition, not just of skill, but of a story lived. Clara whispered softly, "She carries more than just skill. You can see it in how she holds herself." Tom nodded, his gaze unwavering. "That kind of presence isn't taught in any dojo. It's earned." Jamie, the young blue belt who had mocked Maggie earlier, now sat awkwardly, his earlier bravado replaced by a restless tension. His eyes darted between Ethan and Maggie, the realization dawning that this match was no longer a casual exhibition. On the sidelines, Ryan, the young white belt, leaned forward, fingers gripping his knees so tightly his knuckles whitened. His wide eyes reflected, mingled with nervous excitement. This was more than a sparring match. It was a lesson in humility and strength. Maggie took a slow, deliberate breath, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. She lowered her gaze briefly, then raised it, meeting Ethan's eyes with unshakable resolve. She said nothing. The moment required no words. The gym seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them on the mat, a young black belt brimming with confidence, and a grandmother whose quiet strength now commanded the room. In that suspended moment, every spectator understood something profound. Respect is not given lightly. It is earned through presence, discipline, and history, things Maggie wore like armor far stronger than any GI or black belt. The tension was palpable, every heartbeat amplified in the silence. Phones lowered, breaths held, eyes locked. The stage was set. The gym felt suspended in time. The usual hum of movement, laughter, and the rhythmic slap of gloves had faded into a profound stillness that pressed against every person present. Overhead fluorescent lights cast a steady glow, illuminating the polished mats with a clinical sharpness. Every sound, a soft breath, the scrape of a shoe, the faint rustle of fabric, was amplified, each one a note in the growing symphony of tension. Ethan shifted his weight, feeling the texture of the mat beneath his bare feet. His hands flexed lightly in front of him, the muscles in his forearms tightening and relaxing as if in slow motion. His eyes locked on Maggie, searching for any sign of weakness, hesitation, or a telltale twitch. The easy smirk he wore earlier was gone, replaced by a focused intensity that spoke of a fighter who understood this was no ordinary match. Maggie stood opposite him, rooted and calm. Her breathing was measured, slow, almost meditative, as if she had been here before countless times, not just on a mat, but in moments far heavier than this one. Her posture was impeccable, shoulders relaxed yet squared, chin slightly tucked in, eyes steady and unblinking. The faint scent of worn leather gloves mingled with the lingering trace of pine cleaner in the air. It was a subtle reminder of the countless hours spent in training and discipline. The crowd around the mat had fallen into an almost reverent silence. Even the youngest students, usually restless and eager for action, sat motionless, caught in the gravity of the unfolding moment. Clara's eyes softened, filled with a quiet respect born of recognition, while Tom Alvarez's jaw clenched in a silent tribute to the history he sensed beneath Maggie's calm exterior. Time seemed to slow further as Maggie made the smallest of movements, a pivot on the ball of her foot, a slight lowering of her shoulders, that to an untrained observer would have gone unnoticed. But to those watching closely, these were the unmistakable signals of readiness. A fighter preparing not just with body but with mind, focused and poised. Ryan, the youngest in the room, gripped his knees so tightly his knuckles were white. His breath caught in his throat, a mixture of awe and nervous anticipation washing over him. Beside him, Leah leaned in, whispering, "This isn't just sparring, is it?" Ryan shook his head slightly, eyes wide. "No, it's something else." Ethan's stance tightened, muscles coiling beneath his GI like a spring. Yet behind his focused gaze flickered a trace of doubt. the first crack in his earlier confidence. He had underestimated the quiet grandmother standing before him. Slowly, deliberately, Maggie raised her gloved hands into a guarded position. Her fingers were relaxed but ready, the calm in her movement radiating a quiet power. The air thickened. The silence deepened, almost tangible, like the moment before a bowstring releases an arrow. And then, with barely a breath, the storm was about to break. The gym held its breath. Time seemed to stretch, seconds folding into each other, as if the world itself had slowed. The faint hum of the overhead lights was the only sound, but even that felt distant, muted beneath the tension that gripped the room. The polished mats, normally a stage for movement and sound, lay quiet, waiting to be awakened by the first sign of motion. Ethan stood poised, muscles coiled like springs beneath his GI. His eyes narrowed, sharp and alert, every inch the confident black belt who had sparred hundreds of times before. Yet beneath that practiced exterior, a flicker of doubt flickered, a silent alarm whispered by instinct. This was no ordinary opponent. Across from him, Maggie was the picture of calm strength. Her stance was fluid, not rigid, like a great tree swaying in the wind without losing its roots. She breathed softly, her chest rising and falling in slow, controlled rhythm. Her eyes were steady, unblinking, fixed on Ethan with a quiet intensity that went beyond the mat. It was a gaze that seemed to reach into the depths of him, as if reading his intent, his fears, the years of experience behind his every move. From the sidelines, Ryan's young face was a portrait of awe and nervous anticipation. His small hands gripped the edge of the bench, knuckles pale. Beside him, Leah leaned forward, her voice barely a whisper. She's not just waiting for him to strike. She's waiting for something, like she's been here before. The crowd's usual murmurs and rustling faded away entirely, replaced by a heavy silence that wrapped itself around the fighters like a tightening coil. Every eye was fixed on the mat, every breath held in collective suspense. Ethan made the first move, a subtle feint, a shift of weight designed to probe Maggie's defenses. His feet barely lifted, a whisper of motion. Maggie did not flinch. Instead, with the grace of a dancer and the precision of a seasoned warrior, she shifted her weight just enough to close the angle, redirecting his momentum without striking. It was a movement so small it might have gone unnoticed, but to those watching, it spoke volumes. Ethan's balance wavered, the faintest crack in his control, and for a split second, surprise flickered across his features. His lips parted slightly, an involuntary gasp escaping him. The room seemed to pulse with the weight of that moment, the unspoken message clear. Maggie was not just here to spar. She was here to command. Every heartbeat felt louder, every breath deeper, as the silent dance between them began. The seconds stretched and folded over themselves, thick with anticipation. The gym seemed to shrink into a pocket of silence that wrapped around Ethan and Maggie like a heavy cloak. Every sound, every breath felt magnified in the stillness. The polished mats beneath their feet gleamed, catching the low light and reflecting the tension that pulsed between them. Maggie shifted her weight with the faintest of motions, a subtle pivot of the toes, a slight lowering of her center of gravity. That would have gone unnoticed to most, but to those who knew, it was a sign of readiness. It was a balance that came not from speed, but from absolute control. Her feet rooted firmly to the mat, yet her body held a fluid grace, like a seasoned dancer moving in perfect harmony with a well-known rhythm. Ethan's eyes flickered, his usual confident grin replaced by a sharp, focused gaze. The easy arrogance he had worn all morning was gone, replaced by something more sober, a dawning respect and an edge of uncertainty. The woman before him was no ordinary opponent. From the sidelines, Tom Alvarez leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper as he spoke to Clara. "That stance," he said quietly, "it's not just martial arts. It's tactical, precise, lethal." Clara swallowed hard, nodding slowly. She's been through things most of us can't even imagine. Maggie's gloved hands rose deliberately into position, fingers relaxed but ready. Her guard was not just a defense of her body, but a silent testament to the battles she'd faced, visible in every scar, every steady breath. Her eyes met Ethan's, calm and unwavering, silently conveying, "I am here. This is real." The crowd held its collective breath. The usual shifting, whispering, and restless energy dissolved into a profound stillness. This was no longer a sparring match. It was a reckoning of histories, of unspoken strength and quiet dignity. Ethan adjusted his stance, muscles coiling beneath the GI. The tension in his body was palpable. He was preparing to engage fully, to meet Maggie not as a joke or challenge, but as a worthy adversary. Ryan, sitting on the bench, watched wide-eyed, a mix of awe and realization dawning on his young face. Leah leaned in toward him, whispering, "This isn't just about fighting. It's about respect." In that moment, poised on the edge between stillness and storm, Maggie's presence was a quiet force. It pulled every gaze, held every heartbeat in suspension. Then, with a measured exhale, she moved, not with haste or anger, but with the precision and calm of a lifetime's discipline. The gym's charged silence broke with the faintest shift, the soft, deliberate sound of feet adjusting on the polished mat. Time seemed to slow as Ethan launched the first strike, a sharp, controlled jab, aimed more to probe than to harm. His eyes locked on Maggie's, searching for any sign of weakness, any hesitation to exploit. But Maggie was a pillar of calm. Her hands rose smoothly, a practiced block absorbing the strike with minimal movement. The impact barely shifted her posture. It was as if her body was a carefully tuned instrument, designed to withstand and redirect force with perfect economy. The crowd leaned in, breath held, eyes wide. The air was thick with anticipation and disbelief. This was no ordinary sparring match. It was a demonstration of precision, discipline, and silent strength. Maggie responded not with brute force, but with exquisite control. Her fingers flicked out with the grace of a master craftsman's tools, sliding along Ethan's arm to guide his momentum harmlessly aside. Her movements were fluid yet exact, every motion deliberate and economical. She didn't strike to dominate. She moved to command. Ethan's confident smirk faded, replaced by a furrowed brow and a flash of uncertainty. His strikes grew sharper, faster, but Maggie anticipated each one with uncanny calm. She slipped past his guard like a shadow, her body relaxed yet ready, her presence unyielding. The mat beneath them echoed with the nearly silent rhythm of their exchange, a dance not of competition but of legacy. Every contact was a conversation, every block and parry a word in a story written over decades of experience and resilience. Then, with a swift but gentle sweep, Maggie's hand connected with Ethan's arm, guiding it in a smooth arc that sent him off balance. He staggered, caught by surprise and grace alike. The moment was brief but absolute. For the first time, Ethan faltered. The gym erupted, not in noise, but in stunned, breathless silence. The weight of what had just happened settled over the room like a heavy fog. This was no mere sparring victory. It was a reclamation of dignity, a quiet yet undeniable triumph. Ethan's eyes met Maggie's, and in that gaze was the unspoken admission of defeat and newfound respect. The crowd watched, transformed, as the true story unfolded without a word spoken. The gym remained enveloped in a silence so profound it seemed almost sacred. No cheers, no gasps, just a heavy stillness that pressed on every soul present, as if the air itself was holding its breath in awe. The soft echo of Maggie's last, precise movement lingered in the space like a whispered truth that could not be denied. Ethan sank back onto his heels, the spark of arrogance extinguished from his eyes. His breathing was steady, slow, each inhale carrying the weight of a lesson painfully learned. For the first time, the cocky challenger appeared small, not broken by force, but humbled by a presence that transcended physicality. He met Maggie's steady gaze, and in that silent exchange was a clear admission. He had underestimated her, and now he understood the depth behind her calm. Around them, the crowd shifted as if waking from a spell. Jamie, the brash young blue belt who had mocked Maggie earlier, glanced away, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Parents exchanged wary, knowing looks, many nodding subtly as newfound respect settled among them. Students sat straighter, their eyes wide with a dawning awareness of the quiet strength that had just commanded the room. Leah leaned toward Ryan, whispering with a tremor in her voice, "Did you see that? She didn't just win. She changed everything." Ryan nodded, his young face awash with wonder and newfound reverence. She's a legend. Tom Alvarez rose slowly, his movements deliberate and solemn. His gaze remained fixed on Maggie, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of profound respect. That's no ordinary black belt. That's the real deal. Clara reached into her bag and withdrew an old, worn photograph, faded and creased at the edges. It showed a younger Maggie in uniform, medals gleaming under sunlight, eyes fierce yet resolute. Holding it up quietly, she addressed the room. "This is Maggie Calloway," Clara said softly, voice steady but heavy with meaning. "A former Special Forces operative, a combat veteran who left the battlefield behind to find peace here." The room absorbed the revelation in stunned silence. The story behind the quiet grandmother was no longer a shadow or a rumor, but a powerful truth laid bare before them all. Ethan's expression hardened, not with bitterness but with the weight of his own mistake. His voice, when it came, was low and sincere. "I'm sorry." Maggie's nod was brief but full of dignity. She did not gloat nor boast. Her victory lay not in dominance, but in the quiet reclamation of respect. Respect not only from Ethan, but from everyone who had doubted her. The gym remained silent, the lesson lingering in the air long after the sparring match had ended. This was more than a fight won. It was a moment that transformed every person present, a testament to the strength of humility and history. The gym seemed to exhale slowly, the weight of the moment settling deep into the quiet corners of the room. Maggie stood on the mat, the subtle rise and fall of her chest the only sign of the storm she had just commanded and calmed. There was no triumph in her eyes, no boastful glare, only a serene presence, forged from years of resilience and sacrifice. Ethan rose from his kneel with a slow, deliberate grace. The confident smirk that had once framed his face was replaced by something far more raw and genuine: humility. His gaze dropped briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the lesson learned, not just in skill, but in respect. "You're incredible," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of a man confronted with truth. "I owe you an apology." Maggie's lips curved in a gentle, knowing smile, one that held neither victory nor bitterness, but quiet understanding. "Respect," she replied, her voice steady and calm, "isn't given lightly. It's earned in every choice, every step we take." The crowd remained hushed, their murmurs soft but full of reverence. Jamie, the young blue belt who had mocked her earlier, now looked at Maggie with a new light in his eyes, one of admiration and reflection. Parents, students, and bystanders exchanged glances that spoke of changed perceptions and newfound appreciation for the quiet strength that had just been witnessed. Clara stepped forward, her hand reaching out gently to rest on Maggie's shoulder. "Thank you," she said, her voice tender yet full of gratitude, "for sharing your story with us. You've shown us what real strength looks like, not just on the mat, but in life." A brief glisten appeared in Maggie's eyes, a flash of vulnerability quickly masked by her usual composed demeanor. The years of service, the battles fought and survived, the losses carried in silence, all had remained hidden beneath her quiet exterior until now. Today, that story had been given its rightful place. As the crowd began to slowly disperse, Maggie gathered her belongings with deliberate care. The worn dog tag she carried, a silent testament to a past filled with sacrifice, rested lightly in her hand. They were more than metal. They were memories, anchors to a life few knew. Tom Alvarez's voice cut through the quiet as he called out, "If you ever want to teach here, we would be honored." Maggie paused, considering the offer, then nodded simply. "I'd like that," she said, her tone soft but resolute. The day's events left an indelible mark, not just as a moment of victory or defeat, but as a quiet reclamation of dignity. Maggie had stood her ground not through loud bravado or force, but through presence, truth, and the weight of a life lived fully and honestly. In that presence, she was unbreakable. The silence that had blanketed the gym now began to crack, like the first light of dawn breaking through a long night. A quiet murmur spread among the crowd, soft whispers that carried the weight of growing realization. What had seemed like a simple sparring match was becoming something far greater, a revelation of a hidden legacy, one that none had fully grasped until this moment. Leah's voice rose, trembling with awe yet clear and certain. "That's Maggie Calloway." Her words acted like a spark, igniting a chain reaction. Heads turned, eyes widened, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. The name Maggie Calloway was more than just a label. It was a summons to honor and respect, a recognition of a woman whose life was carved from sacrifice and strength. Clara, quick to act, pulled out her phone and began scrolling through images, old photographs, newspaper clippings, and faded service medals. She held the screen up for all to see. A younger Maggie in uniform, medals glinting under the harsh light of ceremonies, her eyes fierce yet determined. The crowd leaned in, drinking in the proof of a past marked by courage and resilience. Tom Alvarez stood beside Clara, his usual stoic expression softened by a deep, reverent respect. "She left that world behind," he said quietly. "But the discipline, the honor, those things never left her. They live in every move, every breath she takes." Ethan, now fully stripped of his earlier bravado, looked directly at Maggie. His eyes were wide with a mixture of regret and newfound respect. "I didn't know. I had no idea who I was challenging." Maggie's calm face held a quiet sorrow, the weight of a life lived in the shadows, the burden of battles both seen and unseen. "I don't fight for recognition," she said softly, her voice steady but filled with unspoken pain. "But I won't let disrespect go unanswered." The room seemed to exhale collectively, a shared understanding settling over every person present. The moment had transcended a mere sparring match. It had become a testament to honoring those whose sacrifices often go unnoticed. It was a reclaiming of dignity for all who bear their battles silently, away from the spotlight. Jamie, the once mocking blue belt, stepped forward, his head bowed slightly, voice low but sincere. "I'm sorry," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of genuine remorse. Maggie nodded in acknowledgement, her grace unwavering. Apology accepted. As the crowd began to disperse slowly, the lesson lingered in the air, a profound truth that strength isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes, it is the quiet force, the calm presence, that moves hearts and changes lives. The gym had slowly begun to reclaim its usual rhythm, the low hum of conversation returning as people started to disperse. But beneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted, a quiet transformation born not from victory or defeat, but from the weight of truth shared and respect restored. Maggie sat near the edge of the mat, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Her posture was relaxed, yet there was an undeniable presence about her, an aura of quiet dignity earned through decades of discipline, sacrifice, and resilience. The energy around her was no longer tense. It was peaceful, as if the room itself was honoring the story she carried. Ethan approached slowly, his footsteps measured and sincere. His earlier bravado had given way to humility, and his eyes held something new, respect. "I want to thank you," he said quietly, voice steady. "Not just for the match, but for the lesson. I was wrong to underestimate you." Maggie met his gaze with calm steadiness. "We all carry stories others don't see," she replied softly. "It's easy to judge without knowing the full picture. Respect is something that must always be earned, not assumed or demanded." Tom Alvarez gathered a small group of students and parents nearby, his voice warm but resolute. "Today, we witnessed something deeper than skill or technique," he said. "We saw the power of presence, humility, and history. Maggie's strength isn't just in what she can do with her body. It's in the life she's lived, the battles she's survived." Leah nodded thoughtfully, her voice gentle but sure. "It's a reminder that we should look beyond appearances, to value those who have been overlooked, dismissed, or forgotten, not just in martial arts, but in life." Maggie's eyes drifted to the dog tags hanging quietly against her chest. These worn symbols of a past life, each one a story of loss, courage, and survival, were her silent companions. Today, though, they had become more than memories. They were markers of a legacy reclaimed, a respect restored. As the crowd gradually thinned, Maggie rose with quiet grace. There was no need for words, applause, or fanfare. Her strength spoke clearly, in every deliberate step, every calm breath. She carried herself not as a warrior boasting of victories, but as a woman who had reclaimed her dignity through quiet resilience and truth. The lesson lingered in the air, woven into the fabric of the gym. true power often speaks softly, and true respect is earned through humility and unwavering presence. 3 months had quietly passed since that unforgettable day at the gym. The day Maggie Calloway's true story broke through the walls of silence and reshaped everything. The gym itself seemed transformed, infused with a newfound respect and humility that had settled into its very foundation like a living memory. Maggie was no longer just a quiet presence on the sidelines. She had become an integral part of the community. Accepting Tom Alvarez's invitation, she now taught classes regularly. Her style was disciplined, precise, and gentle, every lesson carrying the weight of her lived experience. But it wasn't just about techniques or physical strength. Maggie shared stories of resilience, sacrifice, and quiet dignity. Her students, spanning generations, listened not just with their ears, but with their hearts. Ethan, once the cocky challenger who had mocked her, had changed profoundly. The smirks were gone, replaced by a deep humility and eagerness to learn. He became one of Maggie's most devoted students, approaching training with respect not only for the art, but for the history and personal battles woven into each movement. The transformation was visible, a reminder of how humility and truth could dismantle arrogance. Jamie, too, had undergone a shift. The brash young blue belt was now often seen helping others, seeking guidance from Maggie not only in technique, but in character. The gym had evolved into a space of growth, understanding, and shared respect, a community bonded by more than just martial arts. One quiet afternoon, as Maggie gathered her belongings after class, Ryan approached her, eyes bright with admiration and gratitude. "Miss Calloway," he said softly, "thank you for teaching us. You've shown us what strength really means." Maggie smiled gently, the dog tags that rested lightly beneath her GI, catching the soft light. "Strength isn't just about fighting," she replied, her voice steady. "It's about standing tall in who you are and treating others with the respect you wish to receive." As she stepped outside, the late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the quiet streets. Maggie's silhouette was steady, sure, a living symbol of quiet power reclaimed through resilience and grace. Her story, the grandmother who was challenged as a joke but revealed as a legend, had quietly become a source of inspiration. It was a testament that true respect is earned not by force or words, but by presence, humility, and the courage to face life's battles with unwavering grace. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive tactical stories.